Welcome to Let's Talk About Suicide and how we can have courageous conversations around this specific topic. This is a space for real conversations, a place where we break the silence around one of the hardest topics we face as human beings. This podcast isn't meant to be therapy, it's not formal training, but what you will hear are suggestions, reflections, and practical ideas that come from years of experience from being a crisis and hostage negotiator, and also from other people's expertise, people who've actually lived through these conversations. It's for anyone who wants to feel more confident, supporting the people that they care about. Because sometimes just knowing how to listen, how to ask, or how to stay fully present can make all of the difference. Here we are going to learn from people's stories, from their experience, and from each other. The aim is simple. We want to be able to give you the courage, confidence, and the hope so you can step into those incredibly challenging and difficult conversations that matter without fear of getting it wrong. So let's talk about suicide. Let's begin that conversation. And I've got some amazing guests for you on this show. This morning to talk about some of your experiences specifically around suicide. I know you obviously from the work that we've done in the world of negotiation, but it'd be really great if you could just introduce yourself to our listeners today.
Hi, lovely. Thanks, Nicky. It's great to see you as well. It's been a little while, hasn't it?
It has been a while.
My name's Danny Kett, and I've been I'm now leaving policing after 30 years service, but 18 of those years has been working in and around the hostage and crisis negotiations world. So that's how we know each other, running courses together and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've been involved in probably more incidents of crisis negotiation, that kind of thing than I care to mention. But there are some common threads, I think, that come up with a lot of them, which is, I guess, what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you for that. And for those people that are listening, this podcast is here really to help you. So if you've got a friend or a member of your family who you think is in quite a dark place and you're worried about them and you might be thinking that they are suicidal or thinking about taking their own lives, is opening up that conversation, how to do it, and some of the things that have worked. Now, Danny, both you and I have lots of experience in the world of negotiation, and we've probably both been burnt. Well, I definitely have been in words and sentences that I've used, which is why I know what not to say, most definitely. But still, in the heat of the moment and the emotion, it can be tricky to have those conversations. And I often get asked the question, well, if you talk about suicide, does it not put the thought of suicide into people's heads? And we know from research that that is definitely not the case. So I'd love for you to share some of your world, some of your stories, and some tips that people can take away with them today.
Okay, and I think it's worth picking up on that point that you've just made to start with. It's actually saying the word and being kind of, it's almost being blunt about it. And one of the things that I always say to students on courses when we're training them is, you're not suddenly going to seed this idea in someone's head. If I was to walk into your kitchen and you're preparing food, and I suddenly went, "Oh wow, you've got a really sharp knife in front of you. Are you going to hurt yourself with it?" You're not going to go, "Well, I was making a salad, but actually now that you've mentioned it, I think I might just sort of do myself some harm." And it's a preposterous thing to say, but it does kind of illustrate that element that, people, if you ask the question, you ask it earnestly and honestly, people aren't going to go, why are you asking me this? They may, there's no solid answer to this, is there? Because people react in different ways depending on them and where they're at and their whole background and everything. But there's definitely no value whatsoever in avoiding that conversation, because it can sometimes be that emotional spark that gets that person to open up. Like, somebody's noticed, somebody's there, somebody sees it, and that in itself can start the conversation. And I think taking it just slightly away from crisis negotiation because that's all very dramatic, isn't it? And when people think about that, they often think about people standing on the ledge of buildings or on cliffs and that kind of thing. But sometimes that conversation starts much earlier, and you know as well as I, a lot of negotiation is done on the phone with people who are missing and at high risk, and there may be that threat of suicide that's already in there. But also in day-to-day dealing with staff, we know certainly within policing that our colleagues sometimes, go into crisis or have reactions to some of the traumatic events that they've faced, and also in life. And I've used those negotiation skills um, with uh, with sort of family member who once got themselves into a kind of a state of despair. And I was on the phone trying to work out where they were. Fortunately, I managed to open up that conversation, and they came back before it became a police incident, but it was certainly heading in that direction. And also with people who I've been involved in, who I've been sort of like working with and coaching, who maybe not be police officers, but they've come into the organisation for various reasons, and they've gone through and they're going through something in their life, and being able to say, I'm really worried about you.
Mm.
And I'm also concerned that, you may be considering hurting yourself, or you may be considering suicide because of what you've said to me, or what's going on.
Mm.
Is a way to, it's just honest. And I think one of the biggest things in negotiation is about honesty. I
Mm.
mean, you know as well as I do, the mantra is that the negotiators never lie. So if you're thinking it, say it.
Yeah. You used two words at the beginning there, Danny, which I loved, which was when you say things earnestly and honestly. And you mentioned honesty again around that. Just can you tell me a little bit more about, you talked about a conversation with a family member and having that honest conversation. Can you tell me a little bit more about what skills you used from your world of hostage and crisis negotiation, and how did you get them to engage with you in the beginning?
So in that particular incident, or I say incident, that's very policey, isn't it?
That's
In
very
that,
policey,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I can't break the habit. I can't break the habit. In that situation, it's not a member of the family that I've spoken to recently. You know what it's like. You can be quite close for a period of time, and then people move away and drift off and that kind of thing. And the partner of this, I'm going to be quite careful about how I avoid
Cool.
identifying
Yeah.
people. The partner of this individual rung me up and said, "I'm really worried. We've had a bit of a row about something, nothing violent or anything like that. We had a bit of
Mm.
a row about something. They don't seem to have been themselves for a while. Um, I don't know what I said, but they've just gone off in the car."
Right.
And it was a case of picking up the phone, no answer, went to answer phone. Tried sort of persistently to ring a couple of times, or a few times, no answer. So I just sent a text, and the text was, um, you know, personally addressed. It was, "I'm really worried about you. I've heard that this thing has happened. I've heard that you've had a falling out. I've heard that things haven't necessarily been going well in the last sort of few weeks."
Mm.
Um, and that was pretty much it. It was just, "I'm really worried about you." And in that instance, the nice thing about a text is it's there permanently. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they could delete it. Of course they
Yeah.
could, but they could dwell on it for a little bit.
Mm.
And um, and I got a text back saying, "What have you heard?" And we had a conversation via text for a period of time, and then after a little while, it went from very clipped messages. And this is kind of, you talk about the techniques, if you like. And I don't think I necessarily was aware that I was doing it at the time, but it's matching that pace and matching that energy. So if
Mm.
somebody's talking in really clipped messages, send short ones back because it keeps the flow of the conversation. Um, but the messages started getting a little bit longer and a little bit more, explanatory around what was we were talking about. Um, so I then got to a point of saying, would this be easier if we spoke on the phone? And the answer came back, yes. And I put a call in, and then we talked from there.
Mm.
So it's kind of like that natural thing. But it's I think for me, if you think somebody isn't themselves, I don't know, euphemisms are always difficult, but if you
Mm.
think that they're not right, if they think there's something wrong, reach out. Um, and things like I think we shy away from really important conversations because we don't know what to say, or we accept the first superficial answer. And things like relationship breakdowns and divorce and bereavements and all of those kind of things are are kind of difficult conversations from the offset, or they feel like it to many people. So just that kind of reaching out, because if you put yourself in that position of somebody who's just had a major life loss,
Mm.
and it could be like the obvious things, but it also could be things like loss of a job and things like that, which brings with it a whole sort of disruption to somebody's identity. Um, just send that message and say, I heard this has happened. Are you okay? And the earnest and honesty bit comes into it because you're interested in whether that person is okay. You're not interested in the story. You don't want to know the ins and outs of what they and their husband or wife or partner argued about, or, why they haven't got the job or anything like that. It's how are you feeling? Are
Mm.
you okay? What's, do you want to go for a coffee? Do you want to go for a drink? Shall we have a chat? Because it's an incredibly lonely place being in that position. If
Mm.
you're in that kind of pain, and I always, and I'm sure you've recognized this as well, Nicky, when we are talking to the people in those kind of dramatic jobs, when you're on the edge of the building and that kind of thing, it's when that individual looks around to you and you actually see the pain in their face that
Mm.
they're going through. And that's where the kind of the connection comes. That's where I feel that, all right, we've now gone from just having a chat where I'm trying to engage,
Yeah.
and that person kind of there's an openness there, and there's that. So I think it's allowing that person space to have their pain.
Mm. Oh, I really like that, Danny, allowing someone space to have their pain. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing that story, that personal story as well. I think you're right. Sometimes as negotiators, we talk about crisis a lot in those situations where we're at that life and death, at those everyday situations as well, where we can use the exact same skills. And I love the fact that you phoned the family member a couple of times and you didn't get a response. So you were like, well, okay, then they're not going to pick up the phone. And sometimes that can be really frustrating if you're worried about somebody and you're trying to make contact. So sending that text message, allowing that person that space to be in pain, allowing them to reflect on having that control over when they're ready to respond to you rather than keep forcing that issue.
Mm,
And then matching and pacing how when you're getting that short answers back, you don't want to then write loads and loads and loads. So some of us communicate in clipped ways, and some of us like to give loads of detail. Then when you're dealing with somebody in crisis, it's very important to be who they want you to be in that moment. So yeah, so some great tips for people that are listening in. If you've got a friend or relative that you're reaching out to and you're not able to contact them on the phone, then perhaps try a different way. And then what I really loved, Danny, was that you brought them to that stage and you still let them have the control and gave them the choice of, would it be easier for you if we have this conversation on the phone now? And the response was yes, which then shows you that they're ready to um, engage with you because you've created that lovely safe space.
yeah, and there's also some practicalities to think about as well, because you
Yeah.
might think, let's jump on the phone, but they might be having this conversation on a train and they're holding back the tears. They might be having this conversation in a very public space
Mm.
on text. We can talk about anything in any space via text. They might not be in a position where they actually can verbalize how they're feeling and what they want to talk about. So jumping in without giving some considerations to the practicalities of the situation they're in
Mm.
can be just as harmful. Because if they then don't pick up the phone, you've then gone back, you've taken a step backwards, haven't you? And it's like, okay, that could now be difficult to recover from. So there is the emotional connective element to it, but we're also thinking about the practicalities of the situation that we're in. And certainly for a lot of we know from research a lot of younger people, and particularly younger women, are much more comfortable talking via text. They don't necessarily want to have a verbal conversation. And you've got to consider that if there's a generational gap, if you're a parent and you're concerned about your son or your daughter or somebody, somebody who's younger, I often hear people talk about, kids don't look you in the eye anymore and that kind of thing. But we've got a much better understanding of things like neurodiversity and those kind of complicating factors as well. And we really need to be on that person's agenda, and we need to be talking to them in a way that is right for them. It's not about us. It's about them. If we care about them, it's about them.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love that you said it's about being on the other person's agenda, because sometimes, especially in family crisis situations, there's such a strong emotional connection that it's very difficult to leave the I want to fix this problem solving, making it all about us in the end, although we often see that in a different way. We see it as, well, we're helping them, but we know from our world that that's all about us and what we want and not necessarily what they want. So I think that creating that space and that safe space and asking those questions about big open questions about what is it that you want. And you mentioned neurodiversity there a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive subject. I mean, it could be
Yes,
a pod. Well, I
it
couldn't
could be
say
a
it could be a
podcast.
podcast. It
Yeah,
is podcasts in
yeah,
in its own right. But I think one of the things that we're now understanding as a society is that we're not this kind of homogenous group of people who all think and behave the same, and that's really important. And in some respects, the neurodiversity is useful because it opens up our understanding of people. In some ways, it's kind of limiting because it becomes a kind of a label, which in some cases has a stigma attached to it. I think for me, the important element of it is understanding that not everybody thinks and communicates in the same way, and that's all right. That's good. If we all thought and communicated in the same way, the world would be quite a dull place. And we probably wouldn't progress as a society because, you know, if you look at some of the greatest leaps forward in society and technology and those kind of things, they're almost exclusively allegedly driven by people who would come under a label of neurodiversity. So it's great, but just because that's the way you think and the way you see the world doesn't mean it's the same that somebody else does. And even if it's someone who generally sees the world the same way as you do, when they're in crisis, their filters change and
yeah.
their perspective changes. So don't make assumptions just because you've known. I mean, the fact is that we're saying, you know, this person hasn't been themselves for a while would give you an indication
Mm.
that their filters and their perspectives have changed. So explore the world from their filters and perspectives as they are in this moment, not as they were 6 months ago when they were happy and you were out doing something social or you were in the office or whatever it happens to
Mm.
be.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing, isn't it? Seeing the world from somebody else's perspective. And you're so
Mm.
right. When we become, and I know this from my own, you know, my own smaller crises, which, and you talked about loss, a lot about loss. When we have loss, we know that creates fear, and we know that fear creates anxiety, and we know anxiety shuts parts of the brain down where we're unable to see the bigger picture, and we get caught in that whole emotional brain and emotional thinking. And being able to widen that view for somebody, it is an incredible experience, using sort of, big open questions and seeing the world from someone's
Mm.
perspective and also recognizing how they might feel. But you mentioned something earlier around as well. We're not interested in the relationship. We're not interested in who said what and what happened. We're interested in the person standing right in front of us with no judgment. And I think a lot of the times it's people struggle not to judge because we're unaware of our own biases. Now, I know you do a lot of work in behavior change area. So can you tell us a little bit more from your experience about how we can see the world better from someone else's perspective, but also how we can recognize our own biases?
So Yes. So one of the areas I think is really important in these kind of difficult conversations is if you get to that point of connecting and hopefully you do and taking on board some of the stuff that we've talked about and you've talked about with your other guests. If you get that point of connecting, there's all you've got to continue to create that space. And one of those kind of biases really sits in trying to leap in and fix it, as you mentioned earlier. So when you get that connection, when that person says to you, well, what should I do? That's I think where a lot of people run the risk of tripping over and setting themselves back because they go, well, what you could do is you could, I don't know, go and get a solicitor, leave him, buy him a bottom, buy him some flowers and try and make up for it. Whereas you're still exploring that person's world, you're still exploring their perspective. And it's that element of, well, what do you want to do? Well, if they don't know what they want to do, well, what are your options?
Mm.
Because quite often when you get that sort of like tunnel vision, that's when you think this is the only option I've got. And that's where, and when that only option you've got becomes suicide, that's where that element is there. And it's that case of, well, from in those crisis environments,
Mm.
if you don't do it today, that doesn't take away somebody's option to do it tomorrow, but actually it does take away, if they do it does take the option away of maybe doing something different tomorrow
Mm.
that could make the problem that just a little bit better. And you can't solve people's problems for them. All you can do is guide and support them and let them know that you're going to be there for them. And that can be really difficult for family as well, family, friends, people who are close, because whatever that issue that's affecting the individual that we're concerned about may well be affecting you as well. When we come into it from a negotiating perspective, we come in not knowing
Mm.
that individual, not knowing the person that they've fallen out with, or the job that they've had, or the 6 months or a year or what have you that's led up to that point of kind of crisis. So we've got that ability to be able to come in and go, I don't know.
Mm.
Whereas it's very easy to get drawn into the kind of the conversation where the person that you're talking to does, much more about the issue than we would,
Yeah.
which means that it becomes very easy for you to then start interjecting your thoughts and views and ideas and opinions and that kind of thing. And where that can pull back is when you suddenly get the throwback of, well, you're only saying that because you never liked them, and then suddenly you become part of the conflict and part of the drama as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So it is that, all right, let's stay back. Let's just see where this is going and let it develop.
Yeah. So that sounds again like creating that safe space where the person can talk openly and feel like they've been listened to, and
Yeah,
without somebody giving their opinion and that suggestion. Because I always say, when we say to people, "Oh, you could do that," or "You need to do that," that's all about what we believe to be true and our set of values, and rather than what that other person might be thinking and feeling in that moment, which again, like you said, might not be the same as they were thinking and feeling 6 months ago because they're in
absolutely.
a different thought space and a different processing.
And how do you close that conversation in a
Mm.
safe way?
Yeah.
Because we talk about starting the conversation, but there's also the maybe we don't want to start the conversation because we don't know how to end it. We'll be here for hours. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes that's a practical concern because if you've got to pick your kids up from school, then that is, as important this conversation is, you can't leave them standing at the gate for 3 hours or whatever it happens to be. So what's kind of like a way to end this conversation and the give it permission, give it space to start it up again,
Mm.
to provide what we would call future orientation. So it's all right. Well, we'll have this conversation. I'll ring you again in the morning,
Mm.
or let's go and get coffee tomorrow afternoon, or whatever the right thing is. But it's stopping it from being okay, I'll put the phone down, we'll chat again, to something really definite.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll call you at 10 in the morning when I've dropped the kids off, or I'll be at the garden centre and we'll have a coffee, be there at 3 o'clock, because you're giving that person something, just a glimmer, but you're giving them something
Mm.
for to look forward to in the future, so that you can pick up the conversation again, because you won't fix it. You're not going to fix it anyway. We've already said that, but it's not going to be okay after you've had a deeper, meaningful conversation. It's part of an ongoing process, and it may become to a problem where the two of you sit together and you problem solve and you try and work out what the solution is.
Mm.
But that comes when you've got the trust and you've got the rapport and you've got the ability to do that. And even if it's somebody who you know really well, you've still got to earn that in this scenario, in this situation. If a member of your family is disclosing something to you that they've never talked to anybody about,
Mm.
then they're still deciding whether or not they're going to trust you with this, secret, or with this information, and that you're going to hold their confidence and you're still going to be there for them and you're still going to love them after they've made that disclosure.
Yeah, that is such a powerful point. Are you still going to love me after I've made this disclosure? Uh,
Yeah.
and for to have that trust, and as you quite rightly said, to have earned that trust, and it doesn't matter whether this is your partner, whether it's your son or daughter or your parents, whoever it might be. Um, yeah, you have to earn that trust in that conversation, and trust is so hard to get to
Mhm.
that level where I'm going to share with you something that I actually I'm worried that you might think differently of me compared to our sort of everyday level of trust. You're going to be here in the morning when I wake up, all those sorts of things. So trust is such a wide, trust is definitely a whole episode of podcast. I might come back to that actually around the trust and what does trust mean? What does it look like? How do we earn it? How do we keep it? How do we get somebody in crisis to open up? And as you said, you are never going to get the whole conversation done in one conversation because life just doesn't work like that. And I always teach that negotiation is a series of conversations. And the more conversations we have, and the different things will come up, and different directions will be taken in different directions. But I love that, how do you end the conversation? Because I've never really talked about that. And I think that's such an important thing. How do you walk away from the conversation, leaving that person feeling that they've been valued, that they've been listened to, and that we've got another meeting set up. So yeah, I really like that. And how could you just give our listeners just a couple of tips of how you could close that conversation?
I think don't plan it in the first instance.
Yeah,
That's the important thing. I think one of the problems that you can encounter is if you think, right, I'm going to have this conversation with this person because I know that this is a problem, and you kind of try and strategize it.
right, yeah.
Because if you do that, um, you may want to open the conversation with kind of almost like an exit strategy. And what I mean by that is if you are time limited, I've got to pick the kids up in half an hour, or I've got this thing happening in half an hour, but I just heard that you're not in a very good place, and I just wanted to check in with you and see how you are. Because what that then does is that then seeds the fact that in half an hour's time, you can look, wherever you are in that conversation, it's not a wrench. It might be a bit of a wrench, but it's not so bad to say we need to talk more. Clearly, there's lots more that we need to discuss, but I have got to pick the kids up because I can't leave them at the school gate. Um, then set that time to revisit the conversation, and again, when it comes to trust, don't set it at a time when you can't do it, or don't set it at a time when you're only going to have 5 minutes. So set it at a time when you say, look, I've got to pick the kids up, but when they go to when they're in bed tonight, come over, or I'll give you another ring, and you've got me, you've got my full attention at that point in time. So one of the areas that you can do is think about, right, well, okay, well, maybe I'll seed that limited time period at the start of the conversation.
Mm, yeah. And because if we don't, and then suddenly we're like, right, I've got to go, then we haven't set the scene for that other person. And so again, we take the control away from them, and like seeding that information pre-hand. They might not, as you say, it might still be a bit of a wrench, but actually in their mind they've got, oh yeah, you said you had to go in half an hour, I get that, and then giving them something. I think I talked over you there, Danny. So what were you going to say? Sorry.
No, that's all right. My screen froze for a second, so I
Oh,
was,
okay.
yeah, I wasn't sure that we were still together for a moment.
Yeah, no, we definitely are. Gosh, there's so much there to for people to take on away with them from that initial we would call it initial contact, but from that first message, phoning, not picking up, sending a text message, just saying, and that observational language, I've noticed this, I've been told this. And then checking in again with them, how would you like this conversation to continue? Letting that other person have that control,
Yeah. And I
reflecting back.
just
Go on. Yes, go.
circle back to that
Yeah.
opening again. The trust and the honesty comes from being frank and forthright in that opening. So don't ring up and go, "Hi, how are you?"
Mm,
"I'm fine." "Okay, everything all right?" "Yeah, everything's fine." Open that conversation with the purpose. You might say, how are you?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Well, look, the reason I'm ringing you is
mm,
because I've heard these things." And get them out there. If not, you kind of run the risk of doing that sort of dance for a period of time. "Are you sure you're all right?"
yeah.
"Yeah." And then you may never get over that. So get it get it in there right at the start. Explain why you're phoning somebody. If there is a genuine concern, explain it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, just get it out there. We call it, don't we, addressing the elephant in the room. We talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
Having those courageous conversations. Some people are worried in case you get it wrong. If you get it wrong, you get it wrong. The other person will just say, well, no, actually, you've been misinformed, or they might try and push back. But once it's out there, the other person knows that you are willing to have that conversation, which might be incredibly difficult for them. And they're just looking for that opener and creating that opening, that little space, that little door opener for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess a final tip is when you've had that conversation is how are you going to check in? Are you
Yes.
going to do it daily? Are you going to call them every sort of couple of weeks, or probably not every couple of weeks, but every couple of days? You don't want to smother them. You need to give them that space, but at the same time, you need to know they were there. And I picked up a really good tip from I went to a conference and there was a guest speaker called Jane Leonard, who was I think she was a member of the women's rugby team
Oh,
at
yeah.
one point, and she was talking about I'm not going to tell the whole story, and it's her story to tell,
Mm,
but I've used this with staff who've been going through some difficulties, and it's she called it "What's my number?" So that she said in a situation that she was in, she's with some other women who were doing an endurance event. They set a kind of a code where they rather than having to go into a deep and meaningful conversation every single day about how they were feeling,
mm,
they had a scale. So you could turn around and say, "What's your number today?" "Oh, well, I'm number one," which means that we mean whatever you want, set it up how you want, but
yeah.
you could be number one could be fantastic, or number five could be like the bottom of the scale, or you could be number five, and number five. Do you see what I mean? So when somebody
Yeah.
turns around and goes, "Yeah, I'm number four today," then you can go, "Okay, that's cool. You got that trust, you got that relationship. I don't need to have a call." When you text them or
Yeah.
message them and say, "How are you? I'm number one," then not only are they telling you how they're feeling, but they're almost kind of giving you permission because of that relationship you've got to then ring around, "Oh, you're number one. Let's have a chat about it." Because do you see
Yeah.
what? So
Yeah.
again, really nice way of keeping that contact going without smothering somebody, letting them know you're caring, but kind of having that sort of coded. It's almost like a secret between the two of you, isn't it?
Mm,
Because if anyone else looks at some of these texts, "How are you today?" "Number three." What does that? That means nothing.
yeah.
So just a really nice permissive way of keeping that engagement going.
Yeah, I really like that as well, Danny. That's a lovely way, and like having that agreement between the pair of you and not smothering somebody. Fascinating conversation as always, Danny. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. But before you
Welcome.
go, I
Yeah.
know you're leaving policing and going into a different world. So please feel free to share what world you're going into and how you can help, how you're going to help other people using some of your skills.
Oh, it's very, very kind of you to offer the platform. Yeah, myself and my partner, my colleague, business partner, I should clarify, Bex Kant, who has uh, huge amount of experience as a hostage and crisis negotiator in both this crisis space and counter-terrorism with both established companies called University 9. We are looking at how we can support businesses and organizations. So we are offering support to business and organizations around the kind of behavioral science space. So how can you look at a problem that you've got within your organization, whether or not it's supply chain, whether or not it's a staffing issue, whatever it happens to be, involve stakeholders, and look at the levers that causes that problem and look at the fixes that you can bring in within that behavioral science space. So using biases, using the way that people think to actually make sustainable changes. So I can talk about it for hours, and I'm not going to because that's not what the purpose of the podcast is. But it brings in skills from hostage and crisis negotiation. It brings in everything that I've been developing around the last 5 years of completing a doctorate on behavioural change and behavioural influences and problem solving, and it gives really practical, straightforward solutions to some of the thorniest problems involving people that an organisation can face.
Perfect. And if people want to know more about that, where can they find you?
They can find us on university9.com. We're online, or they can contact me directly. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So either on the web or give us a shout on LinkedIn.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you for your time and your advice. I really appreciate it. If you have in any way been affected by today's podcast episode, there are numbers at the end of the transcript which you can contact. We'd like to thank you all for listening. And if you'd like to join our Facebook group, there is also a link to that in the notes that go with this podcast. Have a great day.